It's gonna be a real fun video. Really excited for this comment section. Over the past 80 years, Nazism has been the bar of how we as a society collectively measure the worst thing you can ever be. And obviously, as of late, it's become a much more prevalent talking point with things like Elon Musk's gesture at the inauguration to a lot of the nativist and nationalistic rhetoric surrounding Donald Trump's talking points. The response to Elon's gesture in particular dominated discussion instantly the minute it happened and remains about a month in an enormous cultural dividing line, with many people warning this is a Nazi salute. It literally meant Sieg Heil, with Musk supporters going, no, he was just trying to say my heart goes out to you. Actually, it's a Roman salute that doesn't exist. Shifting to you're downplaying Nazism, to you call everything Hitler, to we are literally 1930s Germany right now, to actually Democrats are the real Hitler. This discussion is still going on, and looking back on it, trying to take a step back and see the forest for the trees, I realized something, and I say this with as much nuance as I possibly can. Nobody knows what the fuck a Nazi is. Like, it takes somebody hanging a swastika flag off the side of a freeway with a German eagle tattooed on their shoulder blade for people to go, oh yeah, that's obviously a Nazi. But if you go on Alex Jones and praise Hitler and then start selling weird swastika merch during the Super Bowl, people are like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like he's having like a mental health day. I'm not sure. Graduation was great. The possibility of the return to power for Nazis has been a sincere fear globally for all 80 of those years since they fell in 1945. To the point where when people see fascistic rhetoric or white supremacy or anti-Semitism mixed in with that white supremacy or genocide, the go-to classification for all of that is Nazi. But here is the thing. Even though that is completely understandable, there are a lot of different hate groups. Like a lot. It's like a fucking high school club fair. There are so many hate groups. They're like gangs. They're all different. And if we are really worried about another Nazi takeover, it is important to know what those differences are in 2025 versus 1945, as well as how the environment around these groups has changed in order to combat them effectively. Donald Trump is not the only American president in the last 50 years to be called Hitler. And look, I get the dangers of this president, but not everybody who tries to oppress and actively harm millions with violent mobs and loyalty oaths in order to advance industrial power under an anti-Semitic authoritarian regime is Hitler. Specifically because right now I just described Joseph Stalin. You don't know what a Nazi is. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Nazis and Germany, how they came to power, what's the difference between their circumstances and ours, and how to fight it either way. And let's start with this. Most people have heard the cliff notes of this story about how the Nazis rose to power. Oh, the economy sucked. Hitler yelled in a beer hall a lot, and then they were like, hey, here's all the power, okay. I don't want to give you the bazillionth cliff note talking point, so this is just a History Channel lecture, all right? I want to give you some specifics of how things happened in terms of the political maneuverings and the public response, and how Hitler pulled this off in a material way so you can actively understand how specifically fascism can take over instead of just a broad, vague, oh, he yelled in a beer hall, all right? Cool. So for starters, prior to World War I and II, Germany was actually still a right-wing authoritarian government. They were technically like a monarchy with a few constitutional elements. You know, they had dissent, but it was like super weak. They also committed their own genocide in the African colonies, and they were also pretty anti-Semitic and militaristic. But in terms of like the scale of oppression and horrific shit, they weren't nearly as bad as what Nazi Germany would be. And racial supremacy specifically wasn't really like their defining ruling characteristic. But it's important to note that these guys under the Kaiser were already super right-wing and nationalistic. If you want a good example of what they're like today, think of Putin's Russia. So look, World War I happens, Germany loses, the Treaty of Versailles happens, and the German economy gets fucked because Germany is forced to pay reparations for all of this shit. And also within all of that, they established the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was Germany's first attempt at democracy, and everybody fucking hated it. Weimar was weak, unstable, and its constitution was very easy to blow up. Think about the US Constitution as an original essay for a test, and then Weimar was some dude copying 3 minutes before class the entire essay, but missing a bunch of fucking punctuation and things that made sentences. There were too many small political parties in Weimar, and they all fucking bickered with each other all the time. And hyperinflation, because they had to fucking print money to pay for those reparations, and that printing money put a lot of Germans out of work. It made the currency fucking useless. Furthermore, another coalition that hated Weimar was the German military, all right? They went along, but only so much as it benefited them or they wanted to. Great sign. Around this time, the stab in the back theory began to take hold. The stab in the back theory is pretty much this idea that Jews, socialists, and liberals secretly sabotaged the German war effort. Pretty much the conspiracy is that the Germans weren't defeated. These groups let Germany lose so they could gain more power and take hold. It's a false flag loss of a world war, but it's a stupid fucking theory. And brewing with all that, a lot of the Germans wanted a strong leader like the Kaiser. The member berries of it all was so much more preferable to Weimar's constant beefing between small parties who just did nothing. Furthermore, and pretty fucking stupidly, Weimar presidents would often rule by decree using emergency powers in their constitution, as if that wasn't going to fucking weaken that constitution they just set up and set the precedent for a dictatorship down the line. Great fucking job, guys. So here's what happened. Right-wing judges, elites, and military all maintained power during the Weimar Republic and rat-fucked it, calling it a leftist betrayal of values and blaming the loss of the war on it, even though they knew the war was lost in 1918, but they're just trying to play this politics bullshit game. Eventually, this guy named Anton Drexler formed the German Workers' Party in Munich because he also thought Weimar sucked. After a lecturer was invited to speak about the breaking of interest slavery, a professor in the crowd said that he had a problem with the lecture and started speaking about Bavarian separatism. All of a sudden, there was a random guy in the crowd who started to beef with him and push back, and they got into a pretty heated argument. This random guy started attacking the professor's character, really running circles around him and showcasing how good of a speaker he was, and he won that argument against the professor, who walked out in disgrace. And he left the crowd thinking, man, that guy has some amazing oratory skills, and if you can guess who that guy is, he's a German spy. He was a German spy meant to root out political agitators, who was also Adolf Hitler. You don't know about Nazis. I also know I'm setting myself up to get like a ton of shit. I just like getting animated sometimes. I don't know. Drexler liked Hitler and invited him to join the party. Eventually, Hitler started giving speeches in beer halls and really helped grow the party substantially. But after he grew the party a ton, there was an intra-party dispute, and he ended up leaving the newly formed Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party. And Drexler was like, oh shit, maybe the guy who's really good at speaking and has become like the public fucking face of our movement shouldn't leave the party and be driven off like that. So they went to Hitler, and Hitler agreed to be joined only under the conditions that he be made the head of the party, be given dictator-like powers, and referred to as Führer. They were like, bet. And Hitler took over the party, and Drexler became a mascot. Okay, so then Hitler leads a fucking coup to try to violently take over the German government, and it fails spectacularly. It blows up in his face, he gets thrown in prison, but the trial makes him a national figure. In prison, he writes Mein Kampf, Kanye's favorite audiobook, and then realizes he can't violently overthrow the government. No, he has to coup the system legally. So when he gets out, the Nazi party is just shit. In 1925, right? It's pretty much collapsed. So he starts to rebuild the whole fucking thing. He starts Nazi youth groups. He builds an entire propaganda machine with radio and newspapers. He even starts his own paramilitary called the SA, or the Brown Shirts. They would fight communists and socialists in the streets, and that'll be important to remember later on. So in 1928, the Nazis only get about 2.8% of the vote, right? Because Weimar seems to actually be improving. Like there seems to be progress slowly being made. But then the Great Depression happens. The stock market crashes in 1929, and Hitler blames the crash on the communists, the Jews, and the Weimar politicians. He says he will be Germany's savior. He will bring jobs back and stability back, and only he can fix this. Unemployment hits 30%, and in the 1930 election, Nazis shoot up to 18% of the vote. They are now the second largest party in Germany, and by 1932, they are the largest party in Germany. And at this point, it's important to note where the German public was at with all of this, because there's this idea that Germans were all like lockstep and thumbs up, and they were like, oh, it seems everything's going well. But no, there were warnings of how dangerous Hitler was, but not the worst of what he could be capable of. Nazi propaganda wanted people to believe that the entire German public was lockstep in unity with this. Yes, there was a lot of apathy and opportunism to the economy of Hitler's policies, but there were also movements like the White Rose movement and certain church groups and officials who were vocal in their opposition of the Nazis. Even still, widespread anti-Semitism still existed, people were still intimidated, and remember, they all fucking hated Weimar. Even as an oppositional government to fascism, it was so weakly put together, and that's where we come to the three acts that sealed Germany's fate: the Reichstag Fire, the Enabling Act, and the Night of Long Knives. And before we get too panicky, because I know a lot of people are fucking freaking out right now, yes, there are similarities in this story to what the US has gone through, but there are also a lot of major differences in this story that I have mentioned, and if you didn't catch them, I'll mention them at the end of this, but just, there are differences, okay? All right, cool. Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, which is like a prime minister or a majority leader, not the president, in 1933. He's appointed and funded and given power by conservatives and business leaders, mainly because they think they can control him. But here's the thing. Remember how I said the Weimar government loved to rule by decree, setting up a huge issue in a country that was nostalgic for an authoritarian government that they had before? So eventually, the Reichstag Fire happens. If you don't know what the Reichstag is, it's the German House of Parliament. It's reported that this guy, Marinus van der Lubbe, a communists, set fire to the Reichstag building in a communist attack. Now, the circumstances around this fire are still being debated to this day, and either you believe it was a false flag by the Nazis and they framed van der Lubbe, or van der Lubbe did it, but the Nazis were complicit and knew it would happen and used it as a pretext for a power grab. I will say, in researching, there is some evidence that van der Lubbe may have actually set a few of those fires, but that doesn't really fucking matter in this case. Hitler takes that moment and says, this is bad. Communists are setting fire and destroying Germany. Give me emergency powers now so I can fight them and defend the fatherland. He went to Hindenburg, the 85-year-old president of Germany, holy shit, and said, sign this decree that gives me the power to suspend civil liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Let me arrest people arbitrarily and indefinitely, override state governments, and centralize all of the power in Berlin and expand paramilitary powers. And this senile motherfucker Hindenburg signed that shit. And because the Weimar Constitution gives you that loophole to rule by decree, they didn't have to check with Parliament for that shit. That set off the arrest of a vast amount of political opposition, labeling other parties as treasonous, and led to the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act gave Hitler the power to bypass Parliament and literally just make fucking laws whenever he wanted. He didn't even need the president. He would legally be a dictator. And that shit passed after all the communist opposition were arrested, the Catholic Conservative Party caved due to massive bribes, and the brown shirts intimidated the other politicians who were on the fence into voting for it. That was the death of all democracy in Germany. They banned all other political parties, replaced all governors with Nazi governors, took political prisoners and placed them in this new thing they called a concentration camp. But in 1934, the brown shirts, hey, do you see they're coming up a lot again, had split into two groups, the SA and the SS. The SA specifically wanted more power and a second revolution. They wanted to replace the German army. Remember them too? They were like, I don't really fucking like Weimar and I'll just deal with you if I want to. Well, yeah, the German army was still around instead of just Hitler's paramilitary. And yeah, they could have stopped Hitler, but they saw him as a means to an end, even though they felt he was kind of sus. Well, Hitler decided to extend an olive branch. He went to them and said, hey, listen, how about you guys and the SS go and fucking kill the SA and seize power from them. And because Dad decided to kill the paramilitary he helped raise and sided with the German army decided to trust Hitler and thus became the Night of Long Knives. The SA and their leader were killed, and when Hindenburg eventually died, the German army swore oaths to Hitler instead of the Constitution of Germany, making any disobedience of Hitler treason. That was the full takeover. And with that, Hitler made anti-Semitism and racial supremacy law. He took over the press and made state propaganda what everybody should believe and began the Holocaust. Okay. Fucking heavy, right? Like, I know it's a fucking lot. Like, I'm reading it and I'm just like, shit, man. All right. So what's the difference? Let's start with the actions and factors Trump would need to imitate to build that whole mess himself. There are obviously some similarities and parallels in a few circumstances, but if you look closely at those parallels and those similarities, they only match up in a very broad way. A key thing to remember is, again, the Weimar Constitution is very different from the US Constitution, all right? That rule by decree shit they would use all the time is fucking wild. Also, the way they centralized their power, it was just a fucking mess. The US itself has had multiple instances and presidents who have tried to ignore the checks and balances over the years, and because of that, the other branches of government have implemented more checks to the presidency and used federalism to prevent dictatorship. The separation of powers is a huge boon to that. Most of that longing for a king shit, like a sincere belief in that movement, died in 1790. So that being said, these are the 5 factors that would need to happen in order for Trump to just become Hitler or gain the power and influence he had over the US. And like I said before in our Project 2025 video, suspending federalism and using emergency powers to curtail all civil liberties is almost impossible for him to do. Not entirely so, but it's really fucking hard. So yeah, number 1, a Republican Congress willing to depower themselves and give up all of their fucking stuff. Yeah, that's not gonna fucking happen, bro. Not with this Congress, at least. A large amount of them would have to be Trump sycophants, and Congress is filled with opportunists, not loyalists. If you look at the beliefs of all the Republican senators, about 70% of those senators are establishment orthodoxy, and 30% are MAGA loyalist Trumper. In the context of the entire Senate, that's 16 MAGA I'm a super fan for Trump senators versus 84 others. 84. Fuck, it's not fucking happening. Secondly, the Supreme Court. No. Just no. Do you notice that all of the docket cases that they're dealing with Trump, they're positioning so they have the power to decide what goes through and what doesn't? They fucking love that power. 7 of the 9 justices are not Trump loyalists. 6 of those 9 justices are conservative, but only 2 are Trump dick riders. These 2 shitheads. All of the other conservative justices have bucked Trump multiple times during their term. Then public apathy. Are you fucking kidding me? The press is hammering down on this shit. Trump is catching the biggest rash of shit in the last few weeks over Doge and a multitude of other things. His honeymoon period is gone because costs are still high. He has reversed course on multiple fronts because of public outcry. Oh, hey, we accidentally fired all these people. Oh, come back. I'm sorry, we fucked up. He's curtailed some of Elon's powers despite publicly acting. Oh, we're all good. The public is not apathetic right now. The elimination of opposition through legal harassment. Look, Trump can start a lot of shit with trying to push voter ID laws and investigating his political opponents. But in terms of like using the military like Hitler did, we've talked about this several times. The military is not employed by Donald Trump. He's not their fucking manager at a McDonald's. They're their own separate entity for good reason. Because of how segmented the military is, there are multiple checks within each branch, rank, and unit, all who do not swear allegiance to Trump. They swear allegiance to the Constitution, and it is in their training to specifically refuse illegal orders. But what about number 3? Eagle-eyed viewers will see I kind of skipped that a little bit. All right, the Patriot Act is actually a real worry for a lot of people because of the broad powers it grants the presidents. Like back in, it's our old buddy. The year I was terrified to exist in. It's true that the Patriot Act encroached on a lot of civil liberties. And it's true that Trump can gin up certain things to try and make excuses like the Reichstag Fire incident and try to push the Patriot Act further than it should go. But again, about 84% of the Senate is not comfortable with that sort of overreach. And that's not counting federalism or the courts or the fact that the military would refuse unlawful orders against the citizenry because they're fundamentally different from the German army in the 30s. The German army who was like, I wish we had an authoritarian back in the day. The military don't want that shit. And the media, bro, the media has more control now than ever before in history. I'm not just talking about billionaire motherfuckers like the Washington Post, all right? There's a reason Phil won that Pew Research poll. Because the media is not federally or state run, it gets to be dissenting. For every Jeff Bezos, we're going to only cover the free market. There are about a dozen other outlets that actively report and aren't going to stop because the White House said, no. Forced control and suppression was key in Hitler's Germany, and it isn't remotely true right now. People downplaying sources and barring them from being in the press room for the White House is one thing. Trump would have to stop the Associated Press from being published, as well as hundreds of other news outlets from being published. And that would be such a fundamental overreach and a signal to people that shit is fucked up. It could pull the trigger on a political realignment. Over the past 80 years, since the Nazis left, the fear is so high of Nazis ever becoming a thing again that whenever people see something that even looks remotely or feels remotely Nazi-ish, they get very animated and aggressively engaged. Those people hanging those signs off the road that I mentioned earlier almost got fucking jumped on that road as soon as that shit hit Twitter. If Trump wanted to be Hitler tomorrow, it would be virtually impossible with the way things are now for him to become Hitler tomorrow. Unless everybody actively said, yes, let us all give up our power to you right now. Let's have you decide whatever opportunities us other branches of government do. We're not going to say a word. You get to hold our lives in your hands like a small bird or a Big Mac that you've been salivating over for the last 38 minutes. No. Agencies also have to co-sign to enforce Trump's task. He can give an order and it can be refused because he's not a fucking king. Okay? Despite the fucking memes he posts on, I don't know, his weird fan club app that's a failed version of a Twitter or a Thread. What the fuck is the point of this now? So listen to me. Every time you see a headline from Trump that he gets to be a dictator now and nothing can stop him, please do not just immediately believe that shit. Take the notion seriously, like, yo, that's fucked up and you shouldn't be saying that, and it's shitty that you would say something like that in the position you're in, and how fucking dare you. But there's a difference between, yo, fuck this guy, let's block him, he doesn't get to say that shit, and oh no, we're in Nazi Germany, he's won, bye-bye. The last thing I will leave you with is this. I'm sweating, by the way. I'm so brown, I sweat on anything. The Reichstag Fire and power grab after were built around public fear of Germany being under attack after the Great Depression, in a world where something to the scale of Hitler had not widely been known to have happened before. The worst of Trump's coalitions, the nativists, the opportunists and grifters, the nationalists, and yes, the Nazis, all welcome accelerationism. Right? One way these hate groups are similar is that they portray their violent rhetoric as a defense against the barbarians who seek to destroy you and our shared culture. They're warriors, and if you call for violent revolution, they like to label people as, see, these people want violence. You need to give me power because they can be violent against you, and I will protect you like a guard at the gates. That ideology works both ways. If accelerationists who keep fantasizing about the French Revolution and publicly calling for political violence against Trumpists become more prevalent, it is easy for the Trump administration to let shit happen and then raise the specter to get people to co-sign their worst overreach. It's a whiff punish, guys. You're getting baited. But if you don't fall for the bait, And instead you bait them into throwing their crazy rhetoric out there and showing their ass and looking crazy with their kid at the fucking White House and their dumb nativism getting pulled back by the courts that are supposed to be all in line for them. Most people do not buy into their bullshit, and that support they said they had vanishes. There were checks to stop Hitler right after the Reichstag fire and right before it. And people did violently fight fascists in the streets, and it didn't stop it. It made the whole situation worse. By isolating yourself in political camps and disengaging with the process these people are specifically attacking, make no mistake, they are specifically attacking the legal, procedural, political way to take power. You are handing them that victory. And by not unifying under the idea that one man should not have all that power, Germany gave up the ball game. I just realized I quoted Kanye. I'm disappointed in myself. But it's not 1933. It's not 2005. It's 2025. People are still fucking terrified of what Hitler did all this time later. Any amount of overreach scares them the same way when you see a rat and you get worried like, oh my God, am I going to get the plague from this? That's a response that wasn't necessarily there in 1930. Don't let that fear immobilize you or make you disengage with the process Trump is trying to hijack. Don't leave the ring. Stay in and swing back, because eventually that political con artist is just a dogshit racist who can't fucking paint. Let me know what you think in the comments. And that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. This took longer to record than I thought. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I will probably release this on Friday. And for those wondering, I completed my research on the Jubilee episode. I'm in the middle of writing it. It will be out soon. And yes, I will not delay it. We have Freestyle the News on Sunday. Anyway, my name is Tabani. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all soon. Let's go!